We don't need your pathetic handouts anymore. You can go die in a corner somewhere," said Vanessa, throwing my things on the doorstep. My son stood silently behind her with a twisted expression on his face. I just smiled as I took the lottery ticket out of my bag. "Honey, did you even read whose name is on it?" They turned pale. "My name is Clara Jennings. I'm 67. A widow, a former school librarian. Every Friday at exactly 8:15 a.m., I buy the same lottery ticket at a small corner store. It's been that way for 32 years. The numbers are not random. Each one is connected to the life I built with Robert. Only now I lived in my son's house, in the guest room, for $1,300 a month. If you have ever felt that your loved ones treat you not as a family member, but as something temporarily useful, this story is for you. Write in the comments if you have been in a similar situation. Subscribe, it only gets more intense from here. Trust me, you'll want to know how it all ended. The snow crunched underfoot, just like when Robert first drove me to school in his Plymouth. The air stung my cheeks and my fingers on the handle of my bag were numb from the cold. But Friday morning followed its usual script. The corner store, the same ticket, the same numbers. Everything as usual. "Mrs. Jennings, you're here already?" Liam smiled as he wiped down the counter. "It would be a sin to miss out on my luck," I replied, pulling $5 out of my worn wallet. "Same numbers. How could it be otherwise?" 7. Our wedding day. 14. When Ethan was born. 23. The date Robert confessed that he wasn't afraid of old age if we faced it together. 31. The number of the house where it all began. 45. The years I've lived with him. 18. When Ethan graduated from school. Back then, I still believed he would grow up to be a decent man. I kept the ticket behind Robert's photo as a talisman. Liam always wished me luck, not knowing that his words were not just politeness to me, but like a blessing. "Today is definitely your day," he said with a wink. I just nodded and pulled my hood up. My chest felt warm and tingly. Winter doesn't forgive distracted steps, but I walked confidently, as if this time the snow under my feet was on my side. I didn't know that on that very day, my ritual would turn into their nightmare. My room smelled of laundry detergent and silence. That heavy, tense silence in which every movement sounds like an apology. The guest room, as Vanessa called it, with yellow walls, a white blanket, and a vase of artificial orchids. Everything was foreign. No books, no photographs. Just a suitcase under the bed that I never finished unpacking. "Oh, Clara, don't forget that my friends are coming over tomorrow," Vanessa called from the kitchen. "You'd better stay in your room, okay?" "Sure," I replied, wiping a finger mark off the glass. It had been there ever since Luca drew a smiley face on the window, as if the house was trying to remind me that it had once been warm. I tried not to make any noise or take up space. I cleaned without asking and left apple pies in the kitchen, my grandmother's old recipe. No one thanked me, but the plates came back empty. Once I heard Vanessa laughing on the phone. "Come on, we even have a free babysitter." I stood behind the door, pressing a towel to my chest, as if the fabric could protect me from those words. Sometimes I caught myself tiptoeing even in my socks. When your home becomes a cage, you stop noticing how you slam the bars behind you. But then I didn't understand that I had become a commodity in my own son's house. Coffee cups stood in rows on the windowsill like soldiers returning from a lost war. The cold hall of the funeral home, the smell of nutmeg cookies and broken faces. Robert's funeral was quiet. 45 years of life together condensed into an hour and a half, a white cloth on the coffin lid and formal speeches. "Mom," Ethan said as we drove home, "you shouldn't stay in that house alone. It's not practical." I looked out the window, frozen fields, the road Robert and I used to drive down in our youth, holding hands. Back then we dreamed of a garden, a veranda, warm evenings with books. There was no place for the word practical there. "I'll manage," I replied. "I just need a little time." "You don't have much time," Vanessa interjected. "Snow, stairs, loneliness, it's all dangerous at your age." She spoke calmly, but her fingers fiddled with the seam on her bag. I almost believed in her concern. "Almost. We can make it comfortable," Ethan added. "We have a spare room. It'll be like a hotel." The word hotel stuck in my throat, as if it came with a bill and rules for use. I only brought one suitcase with me. Robert's book stayed on the bedside table. I couldn't do it. I thought they were reaching out to me. It turned out they were putting shackles on me. The papers lay on the kitchen table as neatly as a menu in an expensive restaurant. No chance for discussion. Melissa poured coffee as if it were a board meeting. No warmth, no eye contact, not even a perfunctory smile. Clara, I've done the math. Just so everything is convenient and transparent, she said, moving the folder toward me. I tried to see even a hint of sympathy in her eyes, but I was met with a blank stare. Rent, utilities, food, household expenses. A total of $1,300 per month. Of course, we don't earn anything on this. It's just fair. The word fair hung in the air like the smell of sour milk. But I'm alone, I blurted out. And I go to classes at the center almost every day. You use the kitchen, the washing machine, the water, Melissa interrupted, looking at her phone screen. And when the children come, you stay with them. That also affects the expenses. I felt the sheets under my fingers become damp, not from water but from sweat. The numbers were highlighted with a yellow marker. In one of the fields was a neat exclamation mark. Not an accent but a verdict. We really don't want it to be hard for you, she added, as if she were no longer discussing it but summing it up. I signed. Not an agreement, a verdict. Grandma, will you watch cartoons with us today? Chloe asked, clinging to my sleeve with sticky fingers. She had a streak of chocolate paste on her cheek, and the childish confidence in her eyes that I would always be there. Of course I sat down next to her. Not because I was asked to, because I wanted to be needed by someone. Clara, we're going away for the weekend. Would you mind staying with the kids? Melissa said casually as she tied her scarf. What about the nanny? Everything's been canceled, she said without looking up. You're at home anyway. It's easier this way. Easier. I stopped counting the weekends when everything was canceled. I was no longer surprised when the to-do list appeared on the kitchen board. Laundry, groceries, feed the neighbor's cat. Ethan began to disappear. He only appeared in the evening, tired, distracted. We hardly spoke. Mom, thanks for helping out. It's just temporary, he'd say, but he'd be looking at the screen, not at me. When the children fell asleep, I sat on the edge of the sofa in my old terry cloth robe, like on the edge of a stage where no one is watching. Around me were scattered toys, crumbs on the floor, and a list of tasks for tomorrow. They called it help. But help ends when it's not asked for, when they just expect it from you. I became invisible but indispensable, and that was the beginning of the end. The glasses clinked like bells at someone else's party, to which I had not been invited. Vanessa had organized a dinner party. Sparkling earrings, the scent of rosemary, music playing in the background. I finished washing the dishes and was about to go upstairs, but I heard my name. I stood in the doorway, as if on the border between two worlds. Honestly, it's perfect, Vanessa laughed. She cleans, cooks, babysits, and all for her own money. Seriously, the guest giggled. Imagine, Vanessa continued, a housekeeper and nanny in one. And most importantly, it's legal. I didn't hire her. She moved in on her own. The words hit my ears like ice water. I held onto the stair railing, feeling my fingers tremble. My casseroles, my grocery trips, my mornings with my grandchildren. In their stories, it all sounded like business services. Like a convenience service. You're a genius, said another woman. You monetized your mother-in-law. Write a book. I'll call it How to Make Money Off Your Grandmother. Vanessa smiled, and the room erupted in laughter. I stood in the shadows, hiding my face as if it no longer belonged to me. No one looked for me for the rest of the evening. They didn't even notice I was gone. That was when I first tasted the sweetness of future revenge. The drawings lay on the table as if I were a new kitchen set and not a living person. Vanessa smoothed the sheets with her palm, as if she were selling an idea, not a sentence. Ethan stood nearby, shifting uncertainly from foot to foot. We thought you would be more comfortable if you had your own space, she began. In the basement? I asked. It's not a basement. It will be a modular unit with a kitchenette and a separate entrance. Almost like a studio. You'll have privacy. I didn't hear comfort. I heard isolation. Not care, but separate. As if my footsteps in the kitchen creaked too loudly, and the kettle boiled at the wrong time. When will they start? I tried to speak calmly. Next week, she said. We chose a budget option. Simple and functional. Everything there is for one elderly person. For one elderly person. Not for Clara. Not for Mom. But for a category. An object. A module. Ethan was silent. His silence was louder than words. I felt his shoulders tense, as if his body was trying to make itself smaller, less noticeable, so as not to get in the way, so as not to annoy. What if I don't want to go to the basement? I asked. Then. Vanessa paused for a second. Then we'll have to reconsider the format of our coexistence. But I had already bought a ticket, and not just a lottery ticket. First, I thought I had made a mistake. The egg carton was cracked, and I was holding a newspaper with smudged ink. I mechanically checked the numbers, hoping for nothing. A Friday ritual, a meaningless habit. Until that morning. 13, the wedding date. 27, Richard's birthday. 04, the day I arrived at their house. 09, the plot number. 33, Ethan's age when he was born. 07, Chloe's favorite number. Everything came together. Everything. I stood up. A chill ran down my spine, but not from fear, from clarity. The numbers were no longer symbols of loss. They became my ticket in. I took the ticket out of the box, the one marked for luck. It was slightly crumpled with a tea stain in the corner. Real. Like me. Clara. Did you buy milk? Vanessa called from the kitchen. I looked at the refrigerator. At the to-do list. The old me would have answered. Clara. I remained silent. It seemed that for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to explain anything. My hands were shaking, but not from weakness. From a rush. As if a light had been turned on inside me. I checked the website 3 times. The number matched. It didn't just match, it matched my life. It wasn't luck. It was the answer. I didn't scream. I just realized now it was my turn. I forgot to take it out of my robe pocket. A small crease in the corner revealed that it had already started moving, and that could ruin everything. The robe was hanging in the bathroom as always. But that day, Melissa decided to tidy up the linen closet. What's this? Her voice rang out, not with irritation, with fear. I turned my head. She was holding my ticket. Old stuff, I said quietly. From last week. But it's not crossed off. She narrowed her eyes. Are you playing again? She wasn't asking questions. She was already counting. Automatically, like counting change at a coffee shop. Her eyes were trembling, but her lips were pressed into a thin line. I knew that look. It wasn't about anxiety, it was about predator instinct. Ethan entered. What's going on? Mom, did you win? Of course not, I replied and held out my hand. It's just a ticket, Ethan. She didn't give it to me. Her fingers clenched the paper convulsively, as if her life depended on it. Can we check again? I'm just curious. She said barely audibly. I smiled. Come on, you don't believe in luck. Only in calculation. They didn't ask how much. Not right away. But that evening, the wine flowed more freely, and dinner was salmon. Brian poured me a glass, Vanessa laughed. I sat at the same table, but it was as if I were on a different floor. They were celebrating, not knowing they were celebrating their end. Silence is also power. I realized this over morning coffee when Melissa spilled sugar past the cup. Her nails, always polished to a shine, were trembling. And I sat across from her, in a robe with a worn sleeve and gold on the tip of my tongue. Are you sure you don't need a lawyer? She asked casually. For a lottery ticket? I raised my eyebrows. Why would I? Ethan asked if he could buy a bike. Brian didn't bat an eye. He just nodded and immediately started talking about percentages of the winnings. They had already divided it up like a pie, without waiting for it to bake. And I kept quiet. I didn't interfere. I listened as they convinced themselves that everything was under control. Mom, you don't want to deal with all this, do you? Papers, bills. It's hard for you. It's hard for you translates as, it's more convenient for us. I heard not the words, but their underlying meaning. Soft like a trap. I smiled. And I took notes. In my head voices, dates, accents. Melissa's jaw always gave away her tension. Brian's pupils did the same. They couldn't hide their greed. And I learned to wait. Just think, she said, squeezing my hand. We're family. We're close. Family. The same family that tried to hide me in the basement. And I nodded. Like an obedient mother. Like an old grandmother. Like a woman everyone thinks is naive. They plan my future. And I plan their end. Mom, you just don't really understand how things work these days. This phrase sounded like a compliment, but it stung like a slap in the face. I nodded. I didn't argue. I watched as Brian opened his laptop and showed me a diagram he had prepared for clarity. You can put it here. But first you need a power of attorney. Well, to speed up the process. Melissa was silent, but her fingers drummed on the armrest. That meant she was nervous. Nervous meant the plan wasn't going according to plan. I leaned forward, pretending to be interested, and said, "What if I just live on the interest?" "That's not profitable," Brian interrupted too quickly. "Money has to work. Work, move, grow." As if I were not a mother but a startup. Their eyes avoided mine. They still thought I was in basement status. "We are a family after all," Melissa continued. "And I don't want there to be any misunderstandings. Let's take steps together. Steps. Forward. Toward their goal." And they put me in a child's seat. "Okay," I said, looking out the window. "I'll think about it." A couple of tears remained on the glass. From laughter inside. They didn't understand that I no longer needed to be led. I was in the driver's seat. The cameras watched me like hunters watching their prey. But I didn't tremble. I didn't even blink. I stood on the steps in front of the city council chamber, in a coat I used to wear only to funerals. It fit me perfectly. As if it knew, today I am burying their control. "Mrs. Jennings, did you really win the whole jackpot?" Someone in the crowd shouted. I adjusted my brooch. A daisy. Richard had given it to me once. Yes, I did. And what's more, my family didn't know about it. But now the whole town will know. Noise. Cameras clicked like handcuffs. I continued. "A year ago, I lost my husband, and then a voice in my own home. I lived in the basement, under schedules, to-do lists, and shopping lists. I became a function." One of the journalists snorted in shock, as if he didn't expect a grandmother to know the word function. "They tried to turn me into capital. And now I am capital. And I decided to invest in those who didn't appreciate me. The library, the children's center, the women's shelter. Everything is at my disposal. Not a penny to those who wanted my shadow, not my light." The crowd fell silent. Someone applauded, and I took a step down. One, then another. I released the brakes and drove off. On their nerves. The smell of leather chairs in the lawyer's reception room suddenly brought back a painful memory. How Richard laughed when we first paid for insurance. "A boring waste unless I die spectacularly," he joked, snapping his fingers in the air like a Western hero. Back then I tapped my finger on my temple. Today I came to find out how serious he was. "Mrs. Jennings? Please come into the office." The secretary pointed to the oak door. My mouth went dry. My fingers involuntarily gripped the handle of my bag like an anchor in a storm. The office smelled of paper and coffee. The lawyer, a gray-haired Mr. Harrison, looked up. "Your late husband made some unusual arrangements." He handed me an envelope. It was thick, with my name written on it in his handwriting. The handwriting was even, calm. The handwriting of a man who believed he was still holding my hand. Inside is insurance. A policy in my wife's name. It activates in the event of deliberate exclusion from the will or deterioration of living conditions. The amount? Enough to sit even the most cunning manipulators down. I laughed. Quietly. Almost silently. Harrison raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Are you okay?" "More than fine." Richard saw everything coming. And I'm ready to act. The silence in the house before the storm always sounds especially sweet. I stood in the kitchen, rearranging papers on an oak tray. A glass vase with lilies for symmetry. The scent of flowers overpowered the cold smell of calculations laid out in folders. "Mom, what kind of meeting is it?" Brian poked his head in the door, frowning. "A family meeting," I replied calmly. "You, Melissa, the grandchildren, me. Like before. Remember." My heart was pounding in my chest, not from fear but from something new. Something almost sweet. Melissa appeared, as always, too loudly. "Who's going to lead?" She squinted. Me. And I'll start with questions. Questions you haven't answered in a long time. They didn't understand. Not yet. But the table in the living room was already set. Documents, files, copies of letters, photocopies of checks. And in the center a red notebook. The very one in which I recorded all the small favors. Trips to school, payments, consultations, babysitting hours. Every gesture of love. In the accounting line. My fingers trembled not from excitement, but from impatience. My grandchildren were upstairs. I asked my neighbor to take them for a longer walk. Today there would be no play. Only an audit. Richard always said, "Truth is stronger than revenge." He was wrong. Revenge is the truth that is no longer shameful. They thought there would be an apology, but there will be exposure. I had never seen Melissa fiddle with a napkin so frantically before. I laid out the papers in front of me, slowly, like a waitress before presenting the bill. Only at this banquet they served the truth, not dessert. "What is this?" Brian asked hoarsely. "Your numbers." "And mine." I straightened my back, feeling my spine crack as if it were freeing itself from old postures. When I named the amounts, no one interrupted. "Here are the school expenses. I paid for 2 years. Here are the groceries you forgot to compensate for. Here are the nanny shifts. 7 months without days off." "Is this a bill?" Melissa smiled sarcastically. "It's a story. Unvarnished and with captions." The room smelled of lavender and fear. Each number took away a gram of their complacency. The table signed by Richard lay on top of the rest. He had left comments. He knew. A dim light filtered through the blinds. It was as if even the day was afraid to interfere. Melissa whispered something to Brian. I couldn't hear what. But I saw him swallow and look away. Their hands were shaking. Mine held the folder with the truth. "Have you ever considered how much I cost you?" My voice was quiet, but it cut through the ice. They exchanged glances like schoolchildren in geometry class who had suddenly been asked about integrals. I pushed the second sheet closer. The table was shorter but heavier. Not in terms of numbers, but in terms of meaning. Sold house minus 6.5 million. Moving assistance, 420,000. Mortgage payments 2 years almost without delay. Insurance for the children. Gifts. Food. Brian's medical treatment. Plus my time. No days off and no pension. These aren't complaints. These are facts. And the bill. Melissa suddenly flinched, as if the words had pricked her skin. "And you? What do you want now?" she whispered. "Payback. With interest. Money." There was venom in her voice. "No. Respect. And distance." I pointed to the numbers circled in red, the amounts they had forgotten to return. Each line was a nail in the coffin of their truth, and I hammered them in silently, check after check, year after year. Brian was still silent. He stared at the table. His ears turned red. I had noticed this before in court when he lied. The body's habits are more honest than words. They invested in his mother-in-law. Turned out to be their downfall. The door slammed behind me and I froze in the silence. There was no smell of diapers, no children screaming, no clattering of dishes in the air. Just me, my 2 suitcases, and new walls that smelled of primer and freedom. In the kitchen, a discounted kettle boiled merrily on the stove. I sat down on the windowsill, and autumn air rushed in through a crack in the frame, as if the world was congratulating me. On the wall above the sink hung a magnet with the inscription, "The best is yet to come." Someone had forgotten it, but I left it there. "Are you sure you want to be alone?" Brian's voice on the phone was sticky. "I'm not alone. I'm at home," I replied and pressed hang up. The old armchair bought at a sale unexpectedly turned out to be the coziest place on earth. In it, for the first time in many years, I fell asleep without anxiety, without worrying about tomorrow, without fear that I would forget to pick someone up from daycare. There were new documents on the table, and a new lease agreement in my name. In the emergency contact field, for the first time, I wrote not a relative's name, but the name of my neighbor from the 3rd floor, who had simply helped me carry my bags one day. Now I have a key, and not just to the door. The TV hissed like a snake slithering into their immaculate living room. On the screen was a frozen frame with Melissa's face. Not glossy like on Instagram, but contorted with anger. Someone had pressed pause at the most inopportune moment. And now that grimace was circulating on social media as a meme. The golden couple. Mold under the varnish. The announcer read the headline. I watched the broadcast without sound. It wasn't necessary, Brian's face said it all. His glassy stare, his glasses polished to a shine, his trembling fingers on his knees. Their lawyer was silent, his hand pressed to his lips. He was still hoping for a turnaround. But the audience had already made a show of their downfall. Comments poured in like hail. They sold out. Where's the money? Did Mom know? We were so trusting. Melissa cried out from the screen, but I could see that even her own tears didn't believe her. Someone in the studio snorted. The laughter was thin, sharp like a broken nail. I closed my laptop. The kettle was boiling in the kitchen. Outside the window, children were jumping rope. The world hadn't stopped, but in some places it had cracked. They wanted fame. They got disgrace on live TV. The envelope smelled of dust and ink, as if it had been held by silence itself. I found it when I accidentally moved a book on the shelf. Or maybe it chose the moment itself. Thick paper, uneven handwriting. At the bottom, a neat curve of a signature. Richard, if you're reading this, then everything went according to plan. Or almost everything. My chest felt like it was being squeezed by a rubber band. A damp chill ran through my palms, as if he were writing to me from the other side. He knew. He saw. He foresaw. There was no pathos in the letter. Only calculations, instructions, and phrases with double meanings. And a piece of paper pinned to the corner with the code to the safe. I insured not only the money. You too. From them. I reread it 3 times. And then I noticed a small detail. In the upper left corner of the page was a barely noticeable figure. A small paper crane. He always folded them when he was nervous. The safe was in the wall, between an old calendar and a clock that hadn't worked for a long time. Inside were copies of contracts, a tape recorder with recordings of conversations, and a ring. My ring, which Melissa had supposedly lost in the pool. He left but stayed close. I could feel his hand in mine. I no longer whisper. I don't lower my voice or look down. I straightened my back when I entered the studio, and my heels sounded like marching on the floor. Not for them. For myself. Are you ready? The producer looked wary, as if afraid I would break down. I nodded. My pulse was in my ears. Salt was on my lips. My voice is no longer a tool for survival. It is a weapon. Hello. My name is Helen Carter. The phrase struck the air like lightning striking a tree. The studio fell silent. The camera flashed its red eye. I spoke, looking straight into the lens. About the bills, the forgeries, the backroom deals. About the quiet tyranny, the manipulation, the family where love was measured by control. At one point the host coughed, too tellingly. I continued. I no longer have any reason to be afraid. But I do have reasons to speak out. I took out Richard's note and unfolded it in my palm. The paper crane spread its wings. Just as he had once taught me. You loved honesty, didn't you? Here it is. Look. Pause. And a glance, there behind the screen, behind the studio glass, behind millions of eyes. What would you have done in my place?